All right, we're now joined via Zoom by the African and International Relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala, to weigh in on various issues on the African continent. Dr. Sinkala, always a pleasure to see you. A very good afternoon to you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be invited, and good afternoon to your listeners.
Right. Let's talk about what the SACU chairperson and, of course, Botswana's president, Mokgweetsi Masisi, had to say regarding the achievement of the objectives of SACU. He said that they need to ensure the seamless movement of goods and services among member states. How easy or difficult a process would that be among those 5 nations, which were, of course, part of SACU today?
Yeah, well, the policy, firstly, I would like to submit that it's always easy said than done. One of the issues that is affecting the Africans working together is lack of unity and implementing what they discuss in such an occasion, such as the one which is going on currently. But we hope that with the new dispensation and political motivation in terms of economical redefining of the African continent and the African leaders to be at the center of the production of the African economy and being in charge for that matter, maybe we shall see some things making some U-turns.
Dr. Sinkala, the president said something rather interesting to my colleague Samkela Maseko there in Botswana. He said, as they were reflecting on the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, they also then had to talk about the issue of food security in the region and I suppose generally in Africa. And one wonders why we talk so much about food security, on a continent with so much fertile land and the ability to in fact grow food. What are the obstacles and why are we still so food reliant?
Yeah, indeed. We are food reliant because, we need to feed the populations, which is increasingly growing about 4.5% of the total population, if you talk about the whole continent. So we're talking about of 7.5 billion people in the world at 3%. We're talking about 33 million to 40 million people who are being born every now and then. And, the quest for food and supply chain volume logistics also gets affected. But some economists, they've actually overblown the whole situation in terms of the war in Ukraine. And I think, yes, to some extent, Africa can be affected. But I think, in my view, that Africa should grow its own food, to be self-reliant, especially in terms of agriculture. From the background that you've mentioned, that we've got enough resources. We've got unemployment levels which are in excess of 60% on average on the African continent, and we've got all the resources, and I think with the will of the people and the political will to work together with government and the leadership from communities until the president himself of all the countries, whoever is in charge, or prime ministers, once we start working together, we shall grow more food, in fact, to export to outside Africa.
Is it fair to ask the question of whether or not our self-reliance is not necessarily in the best interests of those we are reliant on, whether it is the West or wherever it is? I mean, I think that, you've said it quite well, that we can get to the point where we are self-reliant as a continent. Is there, can someone say that, that there is an issue in terms of getting us to that point, some sort of sabotage, in fact, if you can put it that way?
Of course, we cannot rule out sabotage. There are actually organizations or countries outside Africa, especially in Europe, and some of them who are very identified who benefits, into the poverty industry, where they create a certain want in terms of poverty, and they pretend to be helping in terms of helping the African people. We have seen this, how they have come within NGOs and many other organizations regions which are benefiting. If we look at the set of Europe across Europe, Asia, and many other parts, some places are actually impossible to mine minerals or even to have agricultural enterprise to be implemented. But Africa is a place that they depend on, and I think they do all extent of trying to protect that Africa should be independent. So they create us as consumers of goods, as we have seen the flooding of Asian goods from Asia, especially, which is making it very impossible for the industrialization of Africa and increase employment, because now products are being manufactured from elsewhere, and in that process we are actually disturbing ourselves from actually benefiting in the value chain, where we can have the food processing, transport and manufacturing locally. Yes, some efforts has been made, especially from the South African government, where policies has been defined and designed that 80% must be locally produced, but the cost of production locally also is being faced with challenges, especially labor challenges in the labor unions and other stakeholders.
Yeah, and speaking of this industrialization, Masisi also said that, let me just quote him, he said, guided by our aspirations for regional industrial development, we need to take lessons from what we could have done differently to inform what to do going forward. What are some of the things that we could have done differently when he speaks about that?
Look, I've always mentioned and I've been consistent, and I'll repeat myself to every African leader or African citizen on this continent. If we should ban the importation of toothpicks, only toothpicks, we shall increase and employ more than 3 million workers every year, and that 3 million workers every year we shall integrate into the hospitality as well as transportation and the processing. Because the production of toothpicks alone will have the value chain from the cutting down of the trees, transportation of the trees to the industries, and producing the end product of the toothpick. That will already sustain Africa in terms of employment. Now, if you talk about other products in the motor industry, things that cannot be acquired from Africa, things that can be produced in Africa, such as lenses, indicators, if you look at the car, the paint itself, those which can be manufactured from here, then we shall be thinking of industrialization of Africa. But in the absence of the leadership, the trade and industry departments of all the African states allowing the flooding of commodities on the market, they will be killing actually the local industries, even if they have the will of industrialization of Africa. So we need the participation, not only the government, but individual citizens, on how we can talk to the government and whoever were the stakeholders, we sit on the table and find out which products we can procure from outside and which products we can procure locally to create employment. For instance, chickens now in South Africa coming from Brazil. Is it possible that the African people in South Africa cannot rear chickens? Is it possible that the people from Zambia cannot rear chickens? Is it possible that Nigeria, the biggest economy where the consumption of chickens is very big and huge, and we can't produce chickens, that we have to import chickens from outside? These are difficult questions that we have to ask ourselves. From the beginning of asking ourselves very difficult questions such as this, we shall see the industrialization coming back to Africa. In fact, Africa, especially South Africa, was the hub of industries. If you talk about Jamestown in the East Rand, and as well as in the Rhodoport, and as well as Kia Sands and many other places, those we are producing from soap to most of the products. But now the opening of borders, what they call the Intercontinental Free Trade Agreement, and as well as the liberalization of economies and free market from China, these just floods our economies and we have no control. In fact, the quality control cannot even be present.
All right, Dr. Sinkala, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. That's Dr. Charles Sinkala. He is the African and International Relations expert, weighing in on that Southern African Customs Union, which just had a summit now with the 5 countries, of course, continuing to cooperate. South Africa Africa being one of them. Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa was there and is on his way back to South Africa from Botswana at this time.